Good evening. I'd like to call to order the virtual special meeting of the Board of Education, September 12, 2022. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We're going to move first to personnel items, and I'd like to turn that over to Ms. Hawk for any discussion or comments.
Thank you. I'd just like to request approval of personnel items 3.01 to 3.11.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve? Second. All in favor? Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have action items for the execution and delivery of a joint intermunicipal agreement with Orange Ulster BOCES. I'd like to turn that over to Mr. Cahill. Based on what information I had heard today, it looks like another school district had not passed this. But Mr. Cahill, if you can give an update and feedback for the public to hear.
Sure. So I'll just begin with a little background on the scenario. So Orange Ulster BOCES is proposing a capital project, and there are essentially two ways to finance the project, initially anyways. One was using an intermunicipal agreement, an IMA, which each district would be responsible to come up with an allocation, a certain percentage of the total. In our case, it was about 13.6% of $159 million. So that's the total cost of the project. So that every district, to use the IMA methodology for financing, every district would have to agree to the IMA, the agreement, and then each individual district would be responsible to come up with their own method of financing. And they would have to essentially come up with the allocation over a 3-year period of time. So if it was relatively low, you could potentially use your reserves. You could pay cash. You could do short-term borrowing or long-term borrowing, issuing serial debt, which is what we would have to do. The other methodology for financing was allowing BOCES to essentially finance the project through the New York State Dormitory Authority, DASNY. So as I mentioned, the use of the IMA requires all the districts to be in agreement with this. And my understanding is that's not the case anymore. So therefore, the IMA process or course of action cannot be used. So there's a referendum. So in either case, either an IMA or the use of DASNY for the financing, the voters of the component school districts, there's 17 districts that are part of the BOCES district, need to approve the project. So in this case, the referendum date is October 25th. So it looks as though we collectively and or BOCES would have to use DASNY for the financing. So how does this impact MW? So we saw some presentations, actually really one presentation by BOCES, and they essentially just talked about the IMA course of action, if you will. I believe there was very little discussion about DASNY. What they have said, and the BOCES fiscal advisor, BPD, estimated the using DASNY would be more expensive. The cost would be higher, both because DASNY charges fees, which is true. And they also estimated that or projected that the interest rates through DASNY would be higher. So they said about 50 basis points. So that's half a percentage point. They had estimated that local financing, if we were to issue serial bonds ourselves, it would be about 5% interest rate. And through DASNY, it would be about 5.5%. So the original allocation to MW, to sort of bring it back, was $21.8 million. That was the IMA route using local financing, and we would have to issue serial debt for that. We don't have that kind of money in reserves or free and clear fund balance. So that number with the higher interest rate and with the DASNY fees is now about $22.6 million. That's what the BPD, the fiscal advisor to BOCES, is estimating for Monroe-Woodbury. So for a number that equates to about $1,096,000 each year for the next 20 years. So the term is estimated at 20 years. The original estimate using an IMA for MW would be about $945,000 each year. So a bit higher. Just in terms of the impact to our budget, I had mentioned publicly that it was actually a little less than 0.5% budget to budget increase, that increase to our budget. So with the slightly higher value, $1,096,000, it would be about 0.54% budget to budget increase, and that would continue over time for the next 20 years. And that would equate to an increase in our levy of a little less than 1%, about 0.85% increase to our tax levy. So, the final, I think, sort of question or piece had to do, for me anyways, and I think for others, with the allocation methodology. So what BOCES is using is something called RWADA, Resident Weighted Average Daily Attendance. It's essentially a proxy for enrollment, if you will. And what we're thinking is we send about approximately 160 students to BOCES every year. And proportionally, maybe some smaller districts or districts that utilize BOCES a bit more may benefit by this methodology because they're utilizing the service at a sort of a higher percentage than we would be, even though we're using RWADA, which is essentially just overall enrollment as the basis for the apportionment or the allocation. So the question was, is this prescribed by law? Is it required, the allocation methodology required to be used, RWADA as the methodology to use it? BOCES does that for administrative expenses and certain annual capital expenses, but I didn't know in this instance if that was the most equitable way to do it, or if it was even possible to consider something that may be more equitable. So we're looking into that. We're trying to gather some more information about that. The use of RWADA, is that the only way to do it? Is it prescribed by law? Is it prescribed by regulation? Is there some other method? If it's not prescribed by law, that may be more equitable, taking into account not just the total enrollment of a school district, but the utilization of the service and the facilities and all those sorts of things. So we're still trying to gather some additional information on that question. And then the final piece I just sort of wanted to address is the two methods of financing, the intermunicipal agreement or DASNY. The IMA would basically mean each school district is taking on individual debt. So debt unto itself. For us, we would have to issue a serial bonds, about $22 million. I said 21.6 or 21.8 originally was the number. So we would have to issue debt for that. And in general, more debt is usually not a good thing, right? It's not a good thing for a consumer, a corporation, or a school district. It's one of the things the controller looks at when it determines fiscal stress, your reserves versus your debt. It's one of those things that goes into your credit rating, how much debt do you have versus how, the reserves, your financial position. So, that's the one aspect about the IMA route that I think wasn't talked about a lot. The debt being on our books or the debt being on BOCES books, so to speak. So again, it's sort of an open question, but it's something I think is worth, or has been worth talking about and considering.
Thank you very much.
I have a question pertaining to the RWADA. I don't know if I can ask it here, and hopefully we can get an answer from BOCES, but given the information that you've provided to us, Patrick, is it possible for us as a district to find out what the surrounding OU BOCES schools are getting as far as their percentage so that we can have that information?
We do have that, Stacy.
Okay.
We know what their percentage, their RWADA is, and their percentages. So that was actually one of the things they showed us in their initial presentation. So we're 13.69%. We're actually not the highest. Middletown City School District is the highest at 15.16%. But it does show, and it's using a 21-22 RWADA value. So it's a snapshot in time, whatever your sort of enrollment was for that year, your RWADA number, that's the allocation, for the capital project.
But as you said before, Mr. Cahill, that's not based on the number of students that actually attend. That's based
That's
on,
my question.
Yeah.
Do we have, I mean, I can go back and watch the presentation, but I don't recall the breakdown being that Monroe-Woodbury has X amount of students and we send 160 every year. That's the number that I'm looking for. I'm looking
Yeah.
for the number of enrolled students per se in Middletown and how many they are sending to the program. And I don't know if that's something that we can ask for as a board, but that's what I'm looking for.
I understand. So it's more or less what's the utilization of the BOCES services, their enrollment. And I think we're exploring this. I think the first question would be, is using our WADA prescribed by law? In other words, if it is, or regulation, that's how it has to be done in some ways. If it's not necessarily, if there could be another method, or, it's not, it's not regulation or law, then we could seek some of that information, because I'm not really sure. I suspect, I happen to know a couple of districts that are smaller than us, but send approximately the same number of students.
Mhm.
So when you think of it that way, we're like, if we're paying more based on, our total enrollment relative to a district that's utilizing the services in the same way we are, so I understand what you're saying, Stacy, and that could be something that we try to collect and gather.
Are there any other questions for Mr. Cahill?
This is still a requirement for us to vote to put this forward, right? It came down to which method we were going to use to, or we wanted to go along with to finance it, correct? But we really don't have a choice in terms of going forward with having BOCES put this up as a referendum, correct?
That's correct. Dan. Yeah. I think the IMA or the DASNY route was really about the financing, that BOCES intends to have a public referendum on October 25th, either way. And again, the voters of the BOCES district will ultimately decide, if it's approved or not.
But
And we don't have a choice for that. That's not we don't get to choose that.
Mhm.
Do we advertise it in any way or inform community members what this is going to cost, where the money's coming from, et cetera?
They're supposed to, right, Patrick? They're supposed to provide us with all of that information so that we can share with our community. The only thing we have is what I shared with you, which was that one sheet with the 4 boxes in it. We have not received anything other than that. We do know the date, which is October 25th, and the vote is going to take place at the Education Center. But other than that, they will be providing that information. And at this time, that's all the information we have.
Yeah, that's my understanding, Elsie, that the public relations would be largely handled by BOCES, and they would be assisting with the referendum and the expense associated with it. But as Elsie said, we had asked for some additional details on the scope of the project. And if we want to take a minute, I could actually potentially present that, and we could look at it. Would we like to do that, Michael?
Sure.
Okay, let me see if I can. So can we see that?
Yes.
So we had asked some additional scope. We knew the overall cost was around 160 million, 159,800,000. So what this represents is 4 buildings: the CTEC building, the Axelrod building, Arden Hill, and building number 1. And it basically just breaks it out into 5 categories: new construction, renovation, site development, utilities, and project costs. So we're trying to get some additional detail on the project above and beyond what was sent to us already. Can you see that okay? I went through and I looked at, renovation. The renovation value for all 4 buildings is $103 million. So BOCES has promised to provide us some more details, but this and what was presented to us in August is basically what we have related to the scope.
Okay.
Any questions on that, or?
I do have a question, not necessarily on this, but, and this might be for Mrs. Rodriguez. The intermunicipal agreement, you're saying we have to adopt it, but yet it's giving us an authorization whether we want to adopt it or not. And it's almost counterintuitive. It's pretty much put out in front of us with no option that we have to adopt it because they're requesting it of 17 districts. So what if we don't want to adopt it?
Well, at this point, I think what the discussion and the vote was going to be on was route we were going to choose, the IMA or the DASNY. At this point, we don't have to make that decision because once one of the component districts decides not to go with the IMA, the rest of us have to go the DASNY route. So it's a choice. But that's the only choice we have. How do we fund the project if the project, and the question is, if the project goes through, how are the component districts going to pay for that? And that decision was made already because one component district said, we're not going to go the IMA route.
Correct. Okay, that's helpful just to have everyone understand. And then the other thing, I did attend the Orange County School Board's meeting, and they did talk about this at the BOCES facility. They did say that they will be sending out marketing materials. They expect all of their school districts to help market and get the word out on this. You know, my recommendation is we take a look as a board at more of the data that Patrick can get his hands on, comparing the number of students enrolled. It's my understanding we also have waitlisted children. So, you know, to have that many, only 160 students with 21+ million being requested, I think we really need to look at, you know, this in more detail till we can really decide as a board that we want to fully support this and put marketing materials out to the community. I don't know if anyone has any other comments or questions around that.
Well, that's what I had was alluding to before, is how much do we have to get behind this project, if at all? Number of students impacted versus the overall cost, and what I would consider a disproportionate amount of taxpayer funding coming from Monroe-Woodbury versus other districts. It might not be. I wouldn't think it was in our best interest, but that's just my own opinion, to spend this kind of money on, you know, the BOCES, you know, project. You know, for what we use from BOCES. I believe from that list that Patrick had quoted in terms of percentages, there is a school that doesn't even partake of BOCES, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
So it's, you know, it really comes down to, I think, the cost to put onto our taxpayers. And I would go as far to say is that we should let them know very clearly what this is going to cost them and how much of a percentage, you know, our students actually get out of the BOCES program. That I think I wouldn't carte blanche, you know, help them, you know, promote their project to our own detriment.
Dan, I think to continue with that concept, there's components in this amount that they're suggesting, like a gym and other things, but yet it doesn't feel like that money's being spent to increase the number of students that can attend, right? So I think the other question I think everyone has is, you know, why would we put a gym in versus building? You're going to build a building, why don't we increase the number of slots so that we don't have students waitlisted? You know, we have a gym here. It just seems like I don't know, you know, I'm not an administrator, but it just seems like there's other ways we could use this 100 and something million that would increase the number of students that BOCES serves, which may benefit us more and benefit our students.
Thank you. Suzanne has a question.
Yeah, I think I figured out how to unmute it.
Okay.
My question is, it's more of a comment. It seems to me that we really won't be getting a choice. because if this goes through with the voters, we're going to be stuck with this, aren't we? Whether we agree with it or not.
That's my understanding.
It's
I'm
true.
not really happy about that.
But the other side is, as a district, we could come out with our concerns related to the program and based on the information we have, and, you know, just at least recommend to the voters what our position might be for this program. And I just want to be clear that we are fully in support of CTEC and some of the other services that BOCES offers, especially the special education. It's a fantastic program. Went there, saw it, really well-run program. So it's nothing to do with the programs that they offer. It's the level of money, the level of investment, the lack of transparency to some extent as well, as we were asking for more and more information, and it just wasn't being, you know, sent forthcoming. So yeah, we're going to have to make a call on that when that call for marketing comes through. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, so then if we have to do it, then I have to ask for a motion on number 4, which is the authorized execution and delivery of a joint intermunicipal agreement with Orange Ulster BOCES.
Motion.
Who was that, Jamel?
Yes.
Thank you. Any second? Okay,
Begrudgingly.
Dan.
Put a second in the chat, Mike.
Can I just jump in 1 second? Are you voting on the IMA? Is that what we're doing?
The intermunicipal agreement,
Mm-hmm.
that was what I had questioned before as I was reading it over and had asked if we had to vote on it in the affirmative.
No, you don't. It's no longer necessary to vote on it because
Okay.
it's off the table.
Okay,
So
then we
what
don't-
exactly are we voting on?
You're not voting on
then
any.
we're not voting on anything, which makes it that much easier. Then we are at adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Suzanne,
Second.
second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much.